Hey everyone, welcome. I am MisterBo, and today I thought we would take a look back at all the different boss fights in Crash Bandicoot 4 It's About Time and put them into some sort of ranked list from least favorite to my most favorite. Now there are going to be a few different things I'm basing my ranking on. Firstly, how fun the boss fight was, how hard it was, and just originality for the boss fight itself. Now, of course, this is just my personal list. If you have your own list for which order you would rank all these boss fights in, then let me know in the comments below. I'd love to read through them. Also, if you do enjoy this video, then make sure you click that like button, and if you're not already subscribed, make sure you subscribe for more gaming content and coverage. Now, coming in at last place is a boss that I wasn't even too sure I should include in this list because they aren't technically really a boss, and that is Louise in the level Jetboard Jetty. Now this is a brand new character to the Crash franchise, a character who I don't think we'll ever see again, but this boss fight was just kind of weird. It kind of felt like it was thrown into the game. There was nothing else like it throughout the rest of the game. It would have been nice to have seen other kind of non-known enemies pop up at the end of different levels as smaller mini boss fights, but yeah, this boss fight was kind of just a bit nothing. It was fairly easy and it wasn't even its own level, so that is why of course this is at the bottom of the list. Coming in at number 5 is Trouble Brewing, which is of course the Dr. Embryo boss fight. Now whilst I like Embryo as a character and I thought this boss fight was alright, it was very basic and well, it was very easy. It was simply just doing the same thing over and over again, repeating it, basically dodging the potions or Embryo slamming on the ground and then eventually whacking either the green blobs back at him or using Akano to spin him off the edge of the ledge. I feel like they could have done a little bit more with Embryo's boss fight. It kind of felt like a version of his boss fight from Crash Bandicoot 1, where he was throwing things at you and then eventually you just spin one back at him. So that is unfortunately why he sits at number 5. At number 4, it is the Dr. Entropies. Yes, Entropy male and Entropy female. And the reason this sits at number 4 is of basically a few different things. I really like the idea of this boss fight. It was something a little bit different. Obviously you have the platforming sections to begin the level, and then you have the section with Ika Ika where you're reversing gravity and going left and right, dodging incoming fire and spinning the lasers away. But I felt like this boss fight was what the game was kind of building up to the whole way through it. You knew you were going to eventually take on Entropy, and it was just a little bit lackluster. For one, it was very easy, and I think it just needed another whole section to this boss fight. Yes, the beginning bit where you're sliding, collecting all the bumper berries and using Lani Loli to reverse was cool, but I felt like they could maybe have used Lani Loli again in the actual boss fight against the Entropies, and that might have actually raised this boss fight higher in my list and made it an overall better encounter. Sitting at number 3 is the final boss fight in this game, the final fight against Cortex. And I must say, I think out of all of these boss fights, this boss fight was by far the easiest. For a final boss fight, it did not feel like it at all. Most of the time, you were able to just jump on the platform turrets and bounce over to the next one, just avoiding all the lasers that were being shot at you or avoiding all the platforms. In one of the sections where platforms are falling away, you could basically just cheese it by standing in one of the corners. The only real challenge in this boss fight for me personally was just trying to make it over to the henchmen to spin them back at Cortex without getting hit by one of their rockets. I think one of the things that this boss fight did really well though was the different levels to it. There are lots of different multiple stages, which I think a few of the other boss fights kind of lacked in. It was cool to start off with the Lani Loli section, avoiding these missing platforms, to then move over to the laser section with Ika Ika, which was very much like the engine boss fight from Crash Bandicoot 2. You then had the slow down platform section with Kapuna Wa, which is probably the easiest part of this whole boss fight, and then the Akano bit at the end, again, was fairly easy. You could just jump on a turret, and then from that turret you could make it over to the next turret, so on and so forth, and the boss fight was kind of over before you knew it. And that leaves 2 spots left for the final 2 boss fights, the engine boss fight and then the first Dr. Neo Cortex boss fight. And at number 2, well, that is the first Dr. Neo Cortex boss fight. Yep, I think the first boss fight against him was better than the second boss fight against him. In terms of difficulty, I personally found it a lot more difficult than that final boss fight. While it was basically just avoiding things coming at you, you did have the added ability of using Kapuna Wa to slow things down to make it a little bit easier, and you also had the missiles raining down on you throughout the whole thing as well. Add on to that the sections near the end of the boss fight where the floor is falling, and then you trying to avoid all these objects, whilst at the same time trying to spin back the robots to hit Dr. Neo Cortex. I definitely found it a challenge, and that is why it sits at number 2 on my list. And of course, that means the very first boss fight in this game, Dr. Engine, is at number 1. Might be a bit controversial, but here's my reasonings as to why. Obviously, it is the first boss fight in the game. It's the boss fight that I found the most enjoyable, and that is maybe due to it being the first boss fight in the game. I feel like it was a good introduction to the mechanics that they implemented, avoiding the incoming fire by either jumping or crouching. You then had the enemy minion running at you, and you then needed to spin him back. Do that 3 times, you then need to use Lani Loli to try and get up to Engine within a certain amount of time. Obviously that would get harder and harder each time. You then had the conveyor belt floor to deal with at the same time everything is being thrown at you. And then the final section where you've got the moving platforms left and right sort of shaped things up a bit. I have a feeling if this Dr. Engine boss fight was maybe halfway through the game, it would be lower down on my list. But because it was sort of, again, our first introduction, it felt like it was something fresh. The theme and the vibe around this boss fight was super cool, and personally, it was the most fun boss fight in the game. That is why it sits at number 1 for me. So there you have it, that is my list of all the boss fights in Crash Bandicoot 4 ranked from my favourite to my least favourite. Of course, again, this is my own list, so I would love to know your list in the comments below. Do you agree with mine, or do you have them in some other sort of order? Now, with all these boss fights in general, I was a little bit let down. I did a video before Crash 4 talking about my hopes and my wants for this game, and one of them was hard boss fights, and I feel like that was just kind of lacking from this game. They were all a bit the same, and they were all just slightly on the little bit too easy side compared to some of the platforming levels in this game. If you take a look at Cortex Castle, the final level, and you compare that to the final boss fight, well, they're just completely different there, and I feel like the boss fight should have reflected the hardness that the platforming levels had. I also think there could have been some cooler ideas thrown in for some of these boss fights. Again, like the end Tropy fight, the game was kind of leading all the way up to this fight, and then it was just kind of a little bit of a letdown in my opinion. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you did enjoy this video, then make sure you click that like button because it helps support this video. And again, if you're not already, make sure you subscribe to stay up to date with all my future content. If you'd like to stay updated with myself, you can follow me over on twitter.com at @IamMisterBo. You can also join our Discord server. There's a link to that in the description below. And you can also catch me live streaming every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday over on twitch.tv/IamMisterBo. Again, link to that in the description below. Apart from all of that though, thank you very much for watching and for hanging out with me. I super appreciate it. Hopefully I will catch you in some of my future content. But until then, as always, make sure you take care. Bye bye.